Kia ora tātou, nau mai, haere mai, and a very warm welcome to not only our first council meeting of 7th of February, but also to 2024 and a new year. And from where I've just been recently, this is a lot warmer climate, so it's good to see you all, and I hope you've had a good break. Before we get into proceedings, if I could just ask the Deputy Mayor to start us with a karakia. Thank you.
Tēnā koe e te rangatira, tō tātou koromātua, nau mai hoki pai mai ki papai o ia, o tira koutou te ohu I haere pai atu ki tā wāhi. Your Worship, welcome back. Lovely to see you and the delegation that went over and represented us overseas. Ngā mihi. O tira kia koutou katoa ngā rangatira, to all of you, my esteemed colleagues, he nui te aroha ki te kiti a koutou. It's really lovely to see all of you. Even though some of us have touched base over different things like Waitangi Day yesterday and the movies, it's pretty cool, and a few other things, it's lovely to see you. And to all the officers, ngā mihi ki a koutou I ngā rangatira hoki. Lovely to see all of you, and thank you. I hope you had a good break, even though I know you've been back. E tō tātou rangatira Wade, tēnā koe Wade. I know you've been at the helm and looking over things, so on behalf of all of us, greetings to everyone and thank you. Tū tawa mai I runga, tū tawa mai I raro, tū tawa mai I roto, tū tawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tāi ki e. Tēnā koe, Your Worship.
Kia ora, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Look, just a few housekeeping things. The meeting's obviously being recorded and live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. In terms of health and safety, I just noticed the new screen. It's a bit bigger and a bit larger in front of us. Took me by surprise. Anyway, in the unlikely event of an emergency, on hearing the alarm, we'll exit through the running person signs, green signs, and we assembly at the clock tower in the square Te Maraehine. In terms of health and safety, it's a non-smoking facility, and unlike the event that somebody needs a defibrillator, that's located on the foyer entrance on the ground floor. Any incidents, please report them to our committee administration team. If I just say to the staff again, we have a number of people online, so if we could just give your name and title in the first instance when you speak, that will help with proceedings. And we have councillors online. Councillor Dennison's there. We're expecting Councillor Michelard shortly. And we have an apology from, we might as well do that now, we have an apology from Councillor Harpiter, who's unwell, and we have early departure for Councillor Dennison and late arrival for Councillor Johnson. So I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. If there are no comments, we will vote, please. And that has passed, 13 votes for and none against. Thank you. All right, we go to our next order of business, which is there's no notification of any additional items. Declaration of interest, there being none. No public comment that I'm aware of. So we'll go through to number 6 on our agenda item, which is around acknowledging the New Year's honours that's on page 7 of your papers. And I'll just acknowledge some city members that were honoured in the new year. And I'll start with Naomi Manu. And Naomi is the founder of the Pahuru STEM Science, Technology, Engineering, Mathematics and Medicine Academy. Naomi is from Rangitane, Ngāti Kahungunu and Ngāti Raukawa, and has inspired Māori participation in science and the innovation sectors. They have now over 1,500 year 11 to 13 students over 7 North Island locations. Pahuru is helping develop a more diverse and inclusive scientific community within Aotearoa New Zealand. In 2022, Pahuru won the Diversity Works New Zealand Supreme Award for Diversity. The same year, it also won the Institute of Technology and Engineering International Engineering and Technology Award for the most forward-thinking equality, diversity and inclusion program in engineering and technology. Director of Māori Student Success at Massey University for 2 years. In 2022, Naomi co-founded the Oraki Group Limited, and it's designed its 6-month data apprenticeship program for young Māori. Our next recipient is Johanna Wood. Johanna was the first female president of New Zealand Football. In 2019, Dr. Johanna Wood also became the first Kiwi appointed to the FIFA Council since Charlie Dempsey in the 2000s. As the Oceania representative, Dr. Wood led the bidding for the New Zealand and Australia hosting rights for the FIFA Women's World Cup in 2023. This became the most attended women's sporting event in history, and Johanna became the inaugural chair of FIFA's new World Cup Legacy Committee to drive collaboration across the Asia-Pacific region. At a local level, Johanna is a member of the Red Sox Sports Club, a former Queen Elizabeth College principal for 9 years, and joined Central Football Federation board in 2006, becoming the Federation chair in 2010. She gained a PhD in education from Massey University in 2018 and was made a life member of Central Football in 2020 and awarded the Sport New Zealand Leadership Award at the 2021 Halberg Awards. Pearl Nordler. With a career-long focus on supporting gifted children in education, Pearl is the coordinator for Palmerston North-based Cengate, the Central Region Gifted and Talented Educators, a regional association for teachers and gifted children. A member of Mensa, Pearl has acted as an area coordinator for the organisation and has worked as a gifted education tutor for Aotearoa Gifted New Zealand since 2012. An honorary life member of the New Zealand Association for Gifted Children, Pearl was also a Central North Island advisor to schools for gifted and talented education in primary and secondary schools. From 2002 to 2006, she was a one-day school program teacher at the George Parkin National Centre for Gifted Education. From 2000 to 2003, she served as the national president of the organisation. With a background in occupational therapy and mental health education in the UK, she completed an honours degree in psychology and was the first graduate and postgraduate qualification in teaching. On immigrating to New Zealand in 1998, Pearl taught at several Central North Island schools, providing specialist support for children with additional needs and leading gifted teaching programs. And finally, Patrick Bronte. A tetraplegic at the age of 16 after a swimming accident in 1996, Patrick has spent the last 21 years travelling to interview, record, preserve and archive the stories of New Zealand's military veterans. Using a mouse stick to operate his computer keyboard, Patrick makes these records freely available on his Ngātaua website, founding the Ngātaua Charitable Trust in 2018. This invaluable historical resource contributes to military research and exhibitions, commemorative services, veterans policy development and the Poppy Day fundraising. Patrick is collaborating an app making use of augmented reality AI to make these stories available to up-and-coming generations in a meaningful and immersive way. He accepted his honour on behalf of those veterans who had served our country and those who are serving and continuing to serve our country. So, I would like to put a recommendation to council that the council note the congratulations be conveyed on behalf of council to the local recipients of the New Year's Honours 2024. A seconder for that. Deputy Mayor, are there any comments to that? There being none, I'd ask you to vote, please. And that's passed 13 votes for and none against. Thank you. All right, we have a number of minutes to pass. I'm quite happy to do them together, but if there is a need to separate them, then we can do that. So we'll go through them. In terms of recommendations to council, minutes of the ordinary meeting of the 6th of December 2023, Part 1 public and Part 2 confidential be confirmed as true and correct. And then our other is the minutes of the extraordinary meeting of the 13th of December 23, Part 1 public be confirmed as a true and correct record. And then our final meeting for the year, the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the 18th of December 2023, Part 1 public and Part 2 confidential be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any matters arising?
Just to note for the record, Mr Mayor, the 6th of December one had already been agreed by council, but that was that time change.
Yeah, so just as a matter of record, the 6th of December we've already approved those, but there was a time alteration to them on there. So we're just doing a catch-all for those. So there being no matters arising, I'll ask you to vote, please. It's passed 13 votes for and none against. Thank you. All right. We go through to a notice of motion, and this is from Councillor Barrett on page 73.
We're going to do that afterwards because Debbie's here. So we're going to do that later in the day. So we're going to move to the two LTP papers.
Okay, sorry, Councillor, we're not doing that yet. You'll just have to hold your powder dry there. So we go now to the endorsement number 11, which is page 81, 83 electronically, for those that are electronically. And this is around the endorsement of the city strategy and plans as the foundation for the LTP. So you should have that document there. And I'll ask Julie McDonald, Strategy Manager, to come up. Thank you, Julie. Over to you.
Kia ora koutou. I think we're just waiting for a presentation to go up.
All right. Just give everybody a moment for that to...
Thank you. I've only got 2 slides, so there are lots more coming after that. The purpose of this report and this framework, I guess, is to bring together in one place Council's intended direction for the next 10 years and to show how that it underpins all the decisions that you're making for the LTP, the proposed LTP. There's obviously a strong connection with the budget process, and so this is, if you just want to flick to the next one, sorry, I haven't got a, thank you, that one. This has obviously been a really iterative process, so while that I've got directional swoopy things saying that we went from one thing to the next, it's really clear that there are lots of back and forth in this process, particularly as we get to the budget process. So I thought I'd just mention a few of these. Glasses go on. So we began right after the election, obviously, with an environmental scan, and that's a really important part of our process to explain to councillors and the community just where the city is at and the environment that we're all working in. We did a survey of the process, the progress of the organisation in achieving their direction set out in the last LTP. That's the first time we've done such a concrete kind of survey of that, and I think that was really, really useful. We also did an exercise with community sector groups to ask them what it was that they wanted you to be thinking about as you set about planning your LTP. And then we had the direction setting process, and that's part of the churn, I suppose, the back and forth, elected member workshops, rangitani, contribution to those workshops and to surveys, and then there was an adoption of the vision, goals, principles to inform the LTP. So alongside the drafting and review process for the strategy and plans, there was a lot of research and data considered. Again, your own feedback from rangitani, review by elected members, and just right before Christmas, adoption of targets that went with those goals that you had already considered. So we're up to the best part, which is asking the community what they think about that proposed direction. While I'm very happy to answer any questions, I guess I just emphasise that's as far as we're concerned, that's the important stage now to find out what the community think and where they would like to see your emphasis. So, over to you.
All right, thanks, Julie. So, in other words, it's still a bit of a living document, very much, I understand.
I guess what we're asking for is your endorsement to underpin the proposed LTP that you're going out with. This is what the whole LTP is based on. And once you've heard from the community and are deliberating, then there may well be changes as a result of your consideration, so that it all matches up and belongs together.
Yeah, I suppose more of my commentary was really around if we needed to change anything, it can be changed. Like, this is not locked in. It's not cast in stone. Yeah. Okay. Good. Any comments? Yeah. This doesn't seem to be. Nothing's coming up here on my screen. So just put your hands up if you want to speak. Okay. Thank you, councillors. All right. Go to you first, Barrett. So can you? Yeah.
Oops, I'm sorry. I'm getting confused now with microphones. Questions? A couple questions for you, Julie. Thank you. The first is around the social housing guidelines. This could be an interesting morning. It would seem that we're going to need to collect some reasonably sensitive information from residents to make judgments around whether or not they would qualify or not under these guidelines. And just wanted to get a comment around how we, as a council, manage sensitive information and what confidence applicants would have around that kind of information not ending up in the wrong places.
Thanks for the question. I'll make a couple of comments about why you're receiving this document, and then I guess I will hand to Kerry Lee, in the absence of Catherine, the housing manager, to talk about that. So the reason that these guidelines are here is, as I think you are aware, a while ago it became evident that we were unable to use the community services card as an assessment for criteria for eligibility for social housing, which was very inconvenient, and lots of councils found themselves in the same situation because we were using that as a shortcut, one, so that council didn't have to assess that information because it was more labour intensive, and also because it was a really good mechanism that already existed that the government was already running. So now that we have to do something else, these guidelines are a continuation. They're not a policy departure in any way. They are just our best efforts to change the process without changing council's direction. And so through the 10-year plan process, our purpose for including these is for transparency, and so that those interested in social housing can have their say about these, because it's a good chance to have those, because it's the timing is that it's a good time to do that. Kerry Lee, I'm going to hand to you.
Kia ora koutou, Kerry Lee, Probate Acting Chief Customer Officer. Through the Chair, the tenancy officers have been working with our legal team to look at what information can be gathered and how that information can be stored, and I believe that that work is still ongoing. However, Desiree may comment further.
Thank you. So by the time this became necessary to use, we would have a fully secure system for storing that information and dealing with it?
Yes, where we store the information is not in question, it's what information we store. So we'll certainly, by the time this goes through, we'll have clarity about what we're requesting and what we're citing and what is stored.
Great, thank you. Julie, the second question that I had was just around specifically how we reflect master plans in the overall plan. And it seems like we don't have an entirely consistent approach there to my read. So, for instance, the arena master plan features quite prominently in the recreation and play plan, but in the transport plan, we don't see any mention of the urban cycle network master plan. I was just trying to understand why some master plans feature and others do not.
I might ask David to comment on this, but my comment initially is that at the back of the strategy, we've made a worthy and concerted effort to gather all the strategic documents together in the one place so that people can see all the places that council's making decisions, because as you know, we can't just have one short document that says this is what council's going to do. There's lots and lots of detail that sits underneath that. I mean, I think that the master plans, that while they've got the same name, they are often quite different documents. And I think that's something that officers have been talking about in terms of how they come to council and the kinds of direction setting that they do. I think, yeah, David, did you want to make a comment about that?
I guess the only comment I'd make at this stage, I assume, is the question in relation to the strategy or the transport plan? Or both?
To the transport plan as shown on page 190.
Yeah. I guess the only thing my response to that would be we're happy to reflect on that between now and next week, review that content and come back to you as to whether or not we feel the Urban Cycle Network Master Plan should have greater representation within the transport plan. From my perspective, you know, the point you make is a good one. They're both master plans. In terms of their hierarchy within the organisation, they have a similar influence in terms of directing capital programs. So I'm happy to take a look at that language between now and when it comes back next week, and if there's a requirement to tweak the transport plan, then we're happy to do that.
Thank you for that answer. Final question,
If I might just add
yes.
to that, I think that, yeah, we're more than happy to do that. I just also note that compared to last time around, when there was an effort to note everything we were going to review, everything that, council was going to do in a kind of actiony way, while those documents are still part of council's strategic direction and live and often will be reviewed and so forth. We've tried to move sort of a level up, I guess, and say that all these things make up council's strategic direction and that they are all part of the framework rather than perhaps make each plan kind of a list of all the things. But that particular one, I think, is something we can certainly look at. Yes, sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, that's all right. I guess it does spark a further question for me, though, which I will pursue in terms of to what extent is kind of political relevancy part of that process of sifting things to the top? And I would say that on reflection, probably cycleways is one of the most remarkably politically volatile topics that a council and a community considers. And so I'm just interested on, are we prioritizing things that have a high level of community engagement in recent past in terms of ensuring that they are evident within our plans going forward?
Yes, we had noticed that. I guess what we're trying to do is steer a course where we say all these things are considered and agreed by council. The ones that happen to be particularly discussed, for example, before Christmas, there was a lot of discussion about youth action. That doesn't take away from the fact that a document that was agreed and is driving the implementation of action within council is still just as important and just as much an agreed direction, or a bylaw that perhaps doesn't need review until 10 years' time. So I think we're very happy to reflect the particular emphasis, but I guess we've been guided by you as to what those things are. But in the meantime, we're trying to set out for the whole community all the things that council has agreed to.
Great, thank you. Finally then, Mr. Mayor, Julie, just page 184 shows the old non-river alignment of the shared path to Asher, so it doesn't reflect the direction taken to council over the last 3 years. And so I'm just wondering how live the link is between the spatial plan as it gets represented
Sure.
and decisions over the course, not just that decision, but decisions in general. Is it an evolved spatial plan at this point?
So I believe the spatial plan was updated on about Thursday when this document had already been printed for agendas, and so we'll make sure that the updated spatial plan is also reflected in this document too, so that they're consistent when they go up for consultation. There was just admin at that point. So
Yeah, I
there has
guess-
been an update to the spatial plan.
Thank you. I'm pleased to have that confirmed. We took that decision a couple of years ago. I
Sure.
guess that's what I'm trying to understand, not just the kind of
Sure.
recent months, but, when a decision's taken a few years ago, how does that actually reflect into the spatial plan?
My understanding, David looks like he really wants to say something. My understanding is that the spatial plan is supposed to be a drawing of council's agreed direction. And so if it's not, then we're certainly keen to have feedback to make sure that it is. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
All right. Councillor Johnson, can you just push your button and we'll see if this works? Okay, you're straight in. There you go.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Julie. Questions around the social housing guidelines on page 202. So I was pleased to hear you say that there was no intended change of direction. But my question is, since we have specified the two types of eligibility, how would, for example, a former refugee be eligible, since they wouldn't necessarily be an international student or possibly even on the public housing register, but they might be experiencing barriers in the rental market, or, for example, a member of the rainbow community or a recently released prisoner. So those are all categories of people that have experienced barriers in the rental market, who I understand under the previous criteria would have if they could have met the income eligibility, might have been eligible under the experiencing barriers to rental. I'm just trying to find exactly what it is. Experience other barriers to accessing housing in the private market.
Sure.
So how are they covered under this new eligibility? Because I'm wondering if there's a gap there.
So the intention is that the decisions that council has made in the past have been that there are priorities within the applicant group, and those include experiencing barriers to accessing private rentals, that you're talking about. However, there has always been the financial eligibility criteria. I suppose that is the first hurdle. So I think that's one of the things we'll be really keen to have feedback on, to make sure that if that is indeed council's direction, that we understand it is, to see if the changes we've had to make to stop using the community services card, whether that changes anything else.
Well, you see, I would argue that if I was in one of those categories, but I wasn't on the MSD's public housing register, I probably wouldn't have any idea what the criteria of the public housing register was. I would not see myself in that eligibility, and so I would then not think that I would be eligible. So how can we make that guideline clearer so that potential applicants can see that they could be eligible?
So the MSD social housing register is I guess it's a proxy for council saying this person has established that they have a need for housing, and is a broader criteria, which is largely financial. However, other matters are taken into account.
I am
Yeah.
concerned about us using that as the criteria, though, because government changes how easy it is to get on the public housing register, from time to time. And there was a stage some years ago where it was practically impossible to get on that register. So if someone isn't on the register, doesn't necessarily mean they haven't got a need for housing, because, as I'm sure you were aware, at one stage, in order to make it appear that there was less of a need than there really was, it became harder and harder to get on the register. So I guess I'm not sure with that change that are we fully reflecting
Sure.
all of the types of people who might be eligible for
Sure.
housing?
I think the only answer I've got for you now is that it's the only mechanism that we're aware of that we could use, short of council doing all of its own assessments of tenants, which I think would then potentially have resource implications. However, I think this is an effort to translate an old system to a new system that we have to use. We're very keen to find out from that particularly social housing provider and tenant community to see if they would also agree. I agree with what you're saying in terms of changes to the eligibility criteria having happened, and I think you're referring to a reclassification of the entire waiting list at one point a few years ago. I don't really have an answer beyond that. I'm not sure if Kerry-Lee wants to comment. It would be over to you if you would like us to. Yeah, this is our best advice at this stage, and we're really keen to hear what people say, and if those issues prove to be demonstrated by submitters, then I guess I would say that would be the opportunity for councillors to reconsider it. However, it's our best advice as to how you could translate the use of the community services card to a new eligibility system.
So basically we have to go out on this. There's no opportunity to modify it before it goes out.
There's certainly an opportunity to modify it, but we would need some advice as to how you wanted us to do that, given that it could well raise other issues.
Okay, well, I'll signal that I would like to modify it. Perhaps you can advise me, do you need a notice of motion, or is it something that we can email in, or what? I'm not just to be clear, I'm not wanting to change the criteria, I just want to make the criteria clear.
Sure. I guess the barriers to access and rentals in the private market and issues of, for example, discrimination, racism and the like have always been considered as part of that application of the criteria. If you wanted to make some of those things more explicit, then we could do that. I mean, probably it would be useful for us to have a resolution as to the intention, particularly if your intention is not to actually change the criteria, but just to clarify it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'm aware that these guidelines are used by staff to determine someone's eligibility.
They are.
And so if we're not explicit about what is included and what isn't included, then there's a risk that the criteria won't be applied in the way that we expected them to be applied.
I think the comment I would make to that is that we have discussed this barriers issue in the past, and I think at one point council proposed starting to list potential sources of, kinds of barrier, and I think the conclusion that was reached at that time was that what if you missed something out, then what you've done is you've actually precluded perhaps something that you didn't, you've left somebody out that you didn't mean to leave out, which is why it does rely on a fair bit of staff discretion in terms of the intent of this policy. If you think that the intent of the policy is not prescribed enough, then yes, a resolution would be helpful to narrow that down.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple of other minor, questions about things. So on page 94, the population is listed twice, more or less in the same paragraph.
Sorry, 94 of...
Page 94 of our papers.
Sorry, I don't have your entire papers. If you could give me the page number of the strategy, that would be really helpful.
Page?
Our page number's different to that.
Oh, okay.
Are you referring to the strategy?
Yes.
Yes. Page 8?
Page 8, thank you. Sorry, I've only got the electronic copy. So the population is referred to on the same page as being 90,400 and 94,400 on the same page.
We can
So
correct that. It's a minor
One of
edit.
those is right.
Sure.
I'm not sure which.
Sure, it's a minor edit.
Okay. And then the other thing on our page 103, which is around the biodiversity strategy, and it's minor, but anyway, the birds are all listed with their Maori names except rifleman. So I think that should be Titipunamu if we're going to be consistent. Thank you.
Was your question, could we do that?
If you'd like to rephrase as a question, that's fine. I'm
Certainly.
just drawing it to your attention.
Certainly.
Thank you.
I mean, I guess I would note that these things that come as questions, I guess staff are relying on the fact that nobody's going, oh no, I don't really want that to happen. So
Okay.
we can absolutely respond to any minor edits that you have got, but I would note that this is, full consultation. It's not being adopted now. So yeah, but we're happy to do things.
I understand that. The question is then, if you'd like a question about
No.
it, why is there one name in English and all the others in Te Reo Māori?
I don't have an answer to that, but we're happy to look at it.
Okay.
Common usage would be my guess, but happy to go back to the staff and look at that.
Sorry, the microphone's not working now.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thanks, Julie. My questions relate to the social housing guideline. The eligibility that's outlined, page 202 for those looking. In terms of demonstrating people's income and assets, are we going to be asking them for that information, or is MSD going to be sharing with us the information that they provide to MSD?
This is probably a question for Kerry Lee. Oh, Catherine Anderson. Yes.
Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm the Senior Housing Tenancy Officer. So most of our applicants are receiving benefits, so it kind of becomes a moot point asking them for their income. I mean, we generally do ask people for proof of the type of benefit that they're on, because if they're eligible for subsidised housing, we need that to work out what their rent will be. We don't have a huge number of people that are employed or have any other type of income. So at the moment, it's something we're still trying to work through, what that process will be. We have had a couple of people recently where we have asked them to bring in pay slips just so we can get a rough idea of what their income is, to try and work out if they're likely to, be eligible, fit within the income criteria. So yeah, my answer would be it's not a huge problem for us because, like I say, most of the people that apply for housing with us are on benefits which are easily confirmed.
Okay, just perhaps to follow up, in this guideline, it's got the first bullet point and then it says or, and then it's got 2 bullet points, and the second bullet point says have cash assets worth less than the threshold for public housing applicants set by MSD. So how are we to determine that?
We have been working off an asset limit of $40,000, and we have found that most people are more than open about what their assets are. Most people, as soon as you ask them, do you have any assets?
So, is there any privacy issues with
everything.
I thought the whole reason we were re-looking at this was that we couldn't ask these questions of people. Are there some privacy issues with us asking for people to provide evidence of their cash assets, or is that what we're doing, or is MSD happy to share that information with us? I'm a little bit unclear as to how we're operationalising this change.
The asset change, the asset criteria has been in place since the social housing strategy of 2015, so it's...
Yeah, but I thought that we had to relook at this because we can't ask...
Community services card we can't ask for.
I'll just get legal to comment.
Can you hear me? Here we go. We no longer will be asking for community services cards in MSD. We don't ask them to share information with us. There are privacy concerns, and we will be doing a privacy assessment when we have finally decided exactly how and what we're going to be asking and how we're going to store it and what we're going to do with all of that process. So it's very much at the forefront of our minds in this.
So if that work is still yet to be done or still being done, is this a bit premature for us to be endorsing this guideline before we have that information?
So this paper is proposed for endorsement for consultation. So we're hoping to get feedback from the community about the implementation of this, but it wouldn't be adopted until the 10-year plan was adopted.
Okay, I'm not so much interested in the feedback just yet. I'm interested in the legality of what we're proposing. I don't think we should be proposing something if we haven't checked that it's legal in terms of privacy, etc.
Well, we are checking it as we go because we still have a list and we still need to be able to process people and provide housing in the meantime while we're going through this. So, yeah, we are still concerned with and managing this as we go before we finalise everything.
Okay, I'll move on. I have some other questions related to the rental settings, the next section down. It talks about the former public housing around 80 units will be set at market rates and then the remaining will be subsidised. Now, when we had the Summer Hayes decision late last year, there was a recommendation that was supported that was asking for mixed options to come back that included mixed model of subsidised and unsubsidised. So as an example, if that was to be supported, if a mixed model was to be supported going forward, and some of our new units were unsubsidised units, would we have to change this guideline?
I think has been noted in the paper possibly, that Summer Hayes is excluded from this policy. This is about the operation of our current social housing portfolio. Because the decisions around Summer Hayes haven't yet clarified whether it's going to be, any of it would be operated as part of our portfolio, it is excluded from this decision making. This is about our current housing.
So why is this called a foundation document in the recommendation 3 in the wording? It's described as a foundation document.
Because that's what it is. It's a policy document for the operation of our social housing portfolio.
So just the existing, not the future. Okay. And just in terms of the conversations that have happened late last year around the limitations of our current model not being able to attract the income-related rent subsidy and the opportunity to look at perhaps different delivery models, would us endorsing this guideline limit any of those opportunities? If we were to look at changing our model, would endorsing this guideline limit that in any way?
No, absolutely not. But so the discussion that was had at the council, I believe you're talking about a councillor workshop at the end of last year. I guess from a community perspective, an office perspective, if council had an intention to review the model, that would be something that would be helpful to signal in an LTP. I would expect to see that there. That hasn't yet been agreed. But this, we've been running social housing for decades, and so we need an operational model that carries on regardless while council has those discussions.
So would that need to be signalled today? Would that need to be included in our consultation material if we were wanting to look at other models that would attract the income-related rent subsidy?
I think that would be helpful.
Okay, so I'm happy to indicate that I'd like to put that on the table for consideration. When would be the appropriate time to look at including that?
I think it would be now.
During this conversation.
This item 11 or item 12?
Preferably item 11. I guess there needs to be some advice come back next week about the implications of that. It's not a small matter.
Well, perhaps I can get some advice. I understand these conversations are happening, and I've been informed that this work will be looked into in year 1. Do we need to be including that in our consultation document in order to proceed with that, or will that work happen anyway?
Through the Chair, I'll see if I can help a little bit around this one. You did make some recommendations last year about, and it was relating to trying to achieve additional income by leveraging our assets a little bit more. And so there was a resolution that was made during the LTP conversations to that effect. So that will happen anyway. If you wanted to be more specific about what you're wanting to do in the social housing space, the Summer Hayes expression of interest that's currently out at the moment may very well provide some other decisions for you to think about beyond that particular point in time. But you can make resolutions, as Julie's already explained. These policies, these plans are based on foundations of where we are now. As you move through the years, you can make information will come back to you in order for you to make other decisions, and depending on the significance of those decisions will depend on whether or not we need to go through a separate consultative process with the community if we need to at those particular points in time. But there are some resolutions that were already made prior to Christmas that, in my view, around looking at options to leverage our strategic assets for return leads my team into having a look in that space. Does that help?
And if I could just add to that, you note particularly the ability of the housing portfolio to leverage, to access the income-related rent subsidy. As you know, councils aren't eligible for that subsidy. Yeah. So if council was to decide on a new model of housing delivery, that would really mean a significant decision about a disposal or a new management of an asset. So we would expect to see the special consultative procedure for that particular proposal, if there was such a proposal made.
Okay, thank you. I feel I'm getting two lots of advice here around whether we need any additional recommendations for this. I'm understanding from the Chief Executive that this work is happening based on the direction we've already given to leverage our assets. But then I'm also hearing that if we were to consider any change of model, that it would be good to consult on that. So can someone clarify, do we need anything further?
Just to clarify, I'm pretty sure that I'd said exactly the same as what Julie just mentioned as well, is that if it's depending on the significance of the change in policy that you have in place, it will determine whether or not we need to go through a special consultative process with the community at the point of making any change to effectively our plans or policy framework. You could choose, if you wanted to, if you're looking at a specific thing, and it appears that social housing appears to be the part that we're talking about at the moment. If you're wanting something more specific about social housing to take place as part of the LTP conversation, then put up a resolution recommendation now to be resolved by council for us to focus in on that. And you could, I would suggest that as part of this agenda is probably the best place to do that.
Okay, thank you. So just further to that, so based on the direction that's already been given to leverage our assets, if a different model for social housing was identified that could attract the income-related rent subsidy, and that was brought back to this table, but it was after our LTP consultation, what would the process look like for us to perhaps consider or adopt a different model?
It's again through the chair, depending on the significance of the change, if it was, and I would suggest that any change to probably social housing and how it is funded, rents that people might pay would be of a significant nature, in which case you would go through, then probably go through a special consultative process with the community around that.
Oh, okay. So just a consultative process specifically on that issue. It wouldn't have to happen during an annual plan or an LTP. Okay. I think I'm comfortable with just leaving it at that then. Thank you.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, officers. And just to follow on from Councillor Naylor's, I think what we were talking about, and the question is around the income-related rent subsidy, and we understand that council's policy doesn't allow for councils to participate in that subsidy in their own right.
No, that's actually government policy. So,
Policy,
the government has excluded council specifically from being able to access that, which is why you have seen some councils, notably Otatahi, set up trusts.
Yeah, for sure. So the trusts actually exist in the communities, and that particular council has partnered with that trust, leased their assets to the trust.
In order to access the subsidy, that's right.
And so the Chief Executive is commenting on the significant change. That would be a significant change. Yes. Okay. Julie, can I just clarify in agreeing with Councillor Naylor that we do not need to move a special resolution today to bring that into the LTP conversation?
I guess the comments we're making through the chair, the comments we're making are that if council wished to signal a more definite action, I mean, leverage assets is a very general thing to say, and it doesn't give council officers much guidance as to which assets did you have in mind. If there's a particular action that you would like considered and options brought back to you, then I guess that would be useful guidance. However, I mean, I would expect to say if there was going to be a major review of that delivery system, it does seem something that would be useful to signal through an LTP, because it's an opportunity to get community feedback. As the Chief Executive's noted, conversations are happening about summer haze and other things at the moment, so it could all get quite confused as well.
For sure, because the status quo at the moment, the subsidy we're referring to, if I'm right, can you confirm that I'm correct, is actually being subsidised by the general ratepayers?
In terms of the operation of social housing, yes.
Okay,
yes.
Cool. Thank you.
And the settings for that are covered in the Revenue and Finance Policy, and that's the subject of the next report as well.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, I've just got a couple of questions. So, Julie, the Public Art and Heritage Objects Plan, does that cover, is that just the physical sculptures that we own, and it's just sculptures, or is it other heritage objects?
My apologies, I didn't catch which document you were referring to.
Oh, it's asset management. Oh, sorry, it's not the plan. Sorry, it's probably into the next.
Oh, the asset management plan, yes.
Yeah.
That's a question for the next report.
The next one, yeah, no, that's fine. We can go to that later. Okay, all right. Have you got a question online? No, you're good. Okay, that's our questions done. So we have a number of recommendations there to council. It's on page 87 of your papers, or 203 if you're electronic. All right. There's that many recommendations here. I'm just getting my head around everything. So, recommendations to, this is on item 11, recommendations to council, that council endorse the Orangi city strategy as a foundation document for the proposed LTP 24 to 34, attachment 1, and that council endorse the draft various plans, housing, urban design, economic development, transport, arts and heritage plan, recreation and play plan, community support, city library plan, community safety and health plan, our climate change and sustainability plan, our Manawatu biodiversity and Manawatu river plan, our resource recovery plan, our water plan, our governance and active citizenship plan, and as foundation documents for the proposed LTP 2024 to 34, attachment 2. Okay, so we'll take those 1 and 2. I think we can put those together because they are sort of one together. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I just thank the officers for pulling that together, the work together quite quickly. I just would make a general comment that, and it's rather semantics, but it does seem a little bit, it's not as joined up as I would have liked, but it is all there. Some of the imageries could be perhaps like there's no business imagery at all, and that's certainly part of the city as well. But I'm fine to look. We've got to get it out there, and as one of my questions was, is it a living document? Can it be changed? I'm sure it can be. So again, happy to move that, and I'll look for any comments if there are any. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. Just briefly did want to acknowledge the amount of work that staff have taken to get us to this point. It was a very fresh and refreshing approach to how we've done strategies and plans in the past. And I think, you know, I certainly see them as something that is more accessible for the community to engage with. And I think a lot of the both color and formatting and presentation, as well as the actual content, should be much more accessible to the community in this round. So I'm really pleased with that and want to acknowledge officers' efforts in that. We've been on that journey for quite some time to get there. Really glad to see it incorporate things like the Living Standard Framework, some sustainable development goals, as well as the wider range of indicators that we discussed at the end of last year. The specific thing that I would like to see further addressed is the one that I alluded to in questions, which is that, in my view, master plans should basically all be on the same footing within here. And I would also like to ensure that in cases where master plans quite often give rise to quite intense community engagement once we actually go to implementation, that we've been very clear in our long-term plan about our intent around those master plans. So I think it's a much more healthy approach for us to include specific mention in the plan of the urban cycle network master plan to avoid any kind of suggestion or accusation from the community as we get further into the work of implementing specific elements of that plan that we were somehow hiding our intent at this stage of the consultation. So I would like to see that daylighted in the plan and understand that officers will be taking some work to consider that and will bring us something in a week's time on that. But overall, I'm very pleased and appreciative of where council staff have gotten us to with this and the process that they've taken us through to get here. Thank you.
All right, is there any, sorry, our text still isn't 100%, so if you want to speak, just put your hand up and I'll, so, okay, so there's nobody else wishing to speak? That's great, okay, all right. Well, we will go to vote, thank you. And that's passed 15 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right, we'll move through to our next item. Oh, sorry. First day back's blues. So we're now going to do number 3. And I'll ask, and we'll also add in Councillor Johnson's amendment. And Councillor, are you okay moving the two of those together? Great. Okay, over to you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So just understanding that there's no intent to change the eligibility, I think it could be clearer, particularly to those reading the guidelines, that we actually state that there is a category of eligibility that is additional to on the MSD waiting list or an international student. And that is the category of people who experience barriers to housing in the private market, usually through discrimination. And so I think it's very important that when we're talking about who is eligible, that we are clear that this category exists. Now, I know that it's referenced higher up the document, but I do think that if you're looking through eligibility criteria and you don't see yourself or the situation of the client that you're assessing described there, there's a risk there that particularly as staff turnover and elected members turnover, there's a risk there that some of the intent could be lost. So this isn't intended to change anything about the current practice. It's just intended to clarify what the current practice is. So that's why I've added that in. And just a word on some of the conversations around the model. I think it would be very sensible for any decisions about the model to be made after there's a report back from staff around the pros and cons, rather than deciding at this point in time to go out and consult on the model when we don't actually have the information, current information, about the pros and cons and what that would entail. So I would counsel other members who've been asking about that we just tie-ho until a staff report back to us on what that might or might not involve, and then a decision can be made about whether or not to consult on it at that time. So, thank you.
All right, so councillors, and for those online, it's number 3, that council endorse the draft social housing guidelines as an adjunct to the draft Mahiri Whare housing plan as the foundation document of the proposed LTP 24 to 34, attachment 3, included an additional clause as following for eligibility, or experiencing barriers to accessing housing in the private market and meeting income and asset thresholds. And that's moved by Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Wood. Are there any further comments to that? Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just to follow on from Councillor Johnson, I'm coming back to this income-related rent subsidy, and the reason for that is, if you haven't already seen the expressions of interest that were called in for the Summerhays development, Council was inviting a wide range of different options that could be put on the table. My fear would be that one of those options that might come in as an expression of interest includes an income-related rent subsidy proposal as part of their development. And we've just heard this morning that that would mean a significant change in perhaps the policy settings. So I just wanted to share that with the room, that because when we look at the papers that were presented to us, and thank you to the officers for the papers, you go down the third or fourth column on the right, and the subsidy is being funded by our general ratepayers. And I think it's been like that ever since council started in social housing, whereas the income-related rent subsidy scheme has been available to councils, not councils, or councils through partners in terms of housing trust and the like for some. I'm not sure whether the current government settings are going to continue that, but we haven't heard of any significant change. So in terms of considering the options that are available, with a huge benefit for our wider ratepayer population, we must have a good look at this income-related rent subsidy scheme.
All right. Is there a question you want to ask?
Me? No, I just put myself in the queue for the right of reply.
Oh, yeah, fine. Over to you now.
Thanks. And just to respond to Councillor Fitzgerald's comments, we have, I think on 2 occasions since I've been elected to council, had very thorough looks at what it would take to avail ourselves of the income-related rent subsidy. So it's not as if we don't understand about it, or we haven't done the work or the research in the past. There have been several papers brought back to us about it, but I would note 2 things. The first one is that because the subsidy is not available to councils, it involves us divesting ourselves of our social housing. And that is something that has never been supported by public submissions. So that is why it has not been done. Secondly, we've already heard today that Summerhays is a separate case, that this policy applies to the current social housing. It doesn't bind us on anything at all to do with Summerhays Street. And so we shouldn't be using Summerhays as a kind of a, how can I say this, that we're not going to be bound on what we do with Summerhays as regards our current social housing portfolio. So there are several reports going back many years, some of them cost quite a lot of money, available on the pros and cons of divesting social housing from council so that the income-related rent subsidy would be available. I'm not sure that it's really the time for me to go into all the ins and outs of it, to be honest, because people will be fed up. But there are many, many good arguments against doing that, and not doing that has been supported by the community thus far. That's not to say that we couldn't have another look at it, but I would like to just challenge the assertion that we're not aware of it or it hasn't been done, etc., etc. It's been, I would almost say, done to death. But every 3 years we have to look at it again.
Okay, councillors, we will vote on number 3, please. That has passed 15 votes for, none against. Thank you. Right, number 4, that the council note the documents in appendices 1, 2 and 3 of this memorandum will be shared with the community as part of the consultation materials in the LTP 24 to 25. No, that should be long-term plan 2024 to 34. I'm awake. Okay, I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any comments on this particular? Okay, we'll vote, please. That has passed 15 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right, moving through to number 12, and this is around our 2024 LTP consultation material, and there'll be a number of documents sent to you. So on page 87 of our papers, page 203 electronically, invite Cameron Mackay, David Murphy up, and Chris Dyerberg, and also welcome Debbie Pereira from Audit New Zealand as well. Thank you.
Right, Morena Koto. If you know Cam and Chris and myself, and welcome Debbie from Audit New Zealand. We thought it'd be useful to invite Debbie along, given the nature of some of the commentary within the report, the letter attached from the Minister, and the recommendations around a slightly different approach to previous years regarding the audit process. So I haven't got this ability to drive the slides. There's only a few, so
We'll drive it from here, I think. For
yeah, there's only 3 or 4 anyway. So purpose of the meeting is to consider the draft LTP consultation material, draft consultation document and supporting material prior to your approval on the 14th, and to be able to gain the sort of feedback that we did in the earlier report, and the same with the LTP material. So, and it's also for the council to decide the nature of the audit process for the 2024 LTP, and there's some more detailed commentary within the report on that. So if we just head to the next slide. So you've seen this image a few times now, and we're running out of circles, which means we're getting closer to the end, but another big milestone today. I mean, the process that's summarised here again is something we've talked about in the past, and relates to the process that Julie walked you through in terms of the strategy and plan development, and then I guess some more of that LTP focused work late last year. Obviously some key decisions prior to Christmas, and a huge amount of work from the team to pull all that together for your consideration today, and then the 14th before it goes out for public consultation. Next slide, please. As you would have seen in the report, the Minister of Local Government is proposing to remove the requirement for the CD consultation document to contain an audit report. We still need an audit report for the final LTP, so we're recommending a slightly different approach, which is supported in the letter from the Minister, which is to start working with Audit now on the review of the LTP. The initial focus on the review with the underlying information and assumptions for the CD and supporting material. It allows us to work alongside audit as we're preparing the material for consultation, rather than sort of approving it, passing it to audit, and then getting it back with the report. So it does reduce some time pressures and provides us the ability to make some adjustments as we go. Is there anything I want to add, Cam?
Yeah, so nothing really too much to add, except for it is quite important for us to continue to do the underlying information audit. And one of the reasons behind that is that we don't get surprises in the final audit when they come back in May, June. So that process still remains. The key difference here is more around the CD audit and the opinion that would traditionally have sat in the consultation document.
Yeah, and thanks, Cam. And we've been obviously speaking to Debbie at Audit New Zealand after receiving the letter, and that wouldn't put you on the spot. Debbie, is there anything you want to add?
No, the only thing for me to add is that legislation is going through mid-February, so I believe that there is a draft of the legislation. I haven't seen it yet, but I have, because it's under legal privilege, but I am aware that the options laid out in the minister's letter is in that draft that will go through. It will be subject to final people reviewing and what goes through the House, but it does have the option of auditing the CD and the long-term plan, not having an audit over the CD, but we do have to do over the long-term plan. It also gives council some options to defer timelines. The reason for this is just to give enough time for councils to pivot, because the changes came out very late in December, probably after a lot of the work has been done. From our perspective, the work would still be the same, so we wouldn't change any timelines in terms of when we plan to come in. We would still be looking at the underlying information to coincide with when council's adopting the consultation document.
Thanks, Debbie. And just the final slide. Thanks, Sarah. So in terms of next steps, obviously we'll be taking your feedback today and making adjustments in a short amount of time for the 14th. There'll be the audit process, the amended audit process, which we just talked about, including Debbie. Council will then formally approve the CD and supporting material for formal consultation. Obviously, we receive submissions, there'll be hearings, deliberations, and then adoption of the LTP prior to 30 June. So appreciate there's a lot of material there, and we have the PDF up with the page numbers, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, David, and others. So can I just summarise through a question? So we're still auditing, it's just the steps we go towards the audit are slightly different to what we've done in the past. Is that right?
Yes, I can answer that. So we're still, the audit process is exactly the same. The only difference would be that we won't give an opinion over the consultation document that goes out for consultation. But we would be doing all the work at the same time. It just allows council to have a little bit more time to get the consultation document together.
And material out, okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Johnson and then Councillor Wood.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, David and Tim. Just a couple of questions about different aspects of the consultation document, if now is the right time to ask them. So the first one is on page 232 of the electronic copy. I was just trying to get the actual page of your consultation document up. Hang on a minute. Okay.
We've got 232 up.
Okay, so 232 is what we've achieved a lot over the last 3 years, that one, that page? Okay, so at the bottom there, we've got community wins. I'm just wondering what the scope is for changing some of those at this point, because, for example, I think some of those would be more economic development and business type things rather than community things. So I just wondered how we could go about maybe making some different suggestions for that box.
Yeah, now's the time to make those suggestions, and we can consider those, as I said, and bring those back next week.
Okay, so is that like a formal, I put up a resolution for something to go in, or, because there's a lot in that box that isn't community specifically, or at least what council considers community. So I just wonder whether it's easier to have a different box for like business, because, you know, business wins, and then community wins. I don't know, but just, it doesn't seem to me to hang together very well, really. And there's a number of community, what I would consider community wins, that are not really mentioned there. I can see Liv looking uncomfortable. Yeah, or business or something.
Morning. We can easily change that. It was, all of these have come from the annual reports over the past 3 years, and this was the one where there was a bunch of things that weren't clearly in other areas, so we can easily come up with a new title for that.
Well, rather than a new title for the box, I guess what I'm asking for is actual community wins to be in.
Sure. Do you have some examples of what you mean by that?
Yeah, so say, for example, the growth of the summer reading programme, some of the library successes, the revamping of some of the community centres that we've done over the last few years. I don't know, that's just off the top of my head.
Also,
Community
council
gardens.
linked, but,
Council
yeah.
linked, but what would come under the remit really of the community committee, as opposed to stuff in there that's more economic development, I think. It needs its own box, perhaps.
Easy.
Thank you. And then my second question, stroke request, is on page 260, where we're talking about the community facilities, and we're talking about the financial impact of the community facilities that we're proposing. Let me see where I've got it. Page 38 of the consultation document, Councillor Wood has told me. Yes, that's right. Thank you. So we've got, discussion about the different hubs and all the rest of it. And then we've got financial impact, which puts together the Pacifica Centre, the library, the CET Arena upgrades, and the Awapuni Library all together. And I would just prefer to see those separated out, because I think if we could have maybe the cost of each, that would be fairer. It's just, when you lump it all together, I think it'll just be easier for public to say, oh, well, that's all too expensive. Whereas, it might be fairer to say, well, actually, this one's 3.5 million and this one's, 35 million. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Just in light of your questions and the community wins, and I don't disagree that there probably is many there, but is the business sector not part of our community as well?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, okay. So these are all encompassing, they're not actually a certain community committee's wins. Is that right? It's all of council?
Yes, at that part of the document, we're talking about the whole of council.
All right. So look, I'm probably the opposite. I mean, I'm quite happy to add in more, but I wouldn't like to see us making one community and one business and one, I don't know, safety and one something else. I actually thought you'd covered it pretty well. It just perhaps lacked a bit of all-roundness. That's how in terms of community, because community, you can use the community term on about anything really. So I would be favouring perhaps making that yellow box bigger, and you've got room to do that if you crib up a bit of space.
Yeah, I'm happy with that, Mr. Mayor. I just want more in it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, we've achieved a lot more than just some of the stuff that's on there, but what you have put there is also pretty good. Now go to, I've got my list, Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions, given it's quite a large document. I just wanted to start on, it's page 11 for me under the separate cover, item 12, attachment 3, regarding the revenue generated from social housing. So I see in the item 12 proper document in table 7, it talks about how the social housing revenue is going to decrease by 5% over the next 3 years. I assume that's because the cost for Summer Hayes will come online, but the revenue generated by those units won't come online until likely year 4. But I noticed that in attachment 3, under the housing activity financial statements, there's no proportionate increase to the social housing revenue, despite the fact that the Summer Hayes units will come online somewhere around year 4 or 5. It increases 73,000 year 2, 75 year 3, 73 year 4, 71 the year after that. I'm just wondering why we don't see a proportionate jump where we see a proportionate increase in our expense due to the Summer Hayes units coming online, and if the revenue generated by those units has been missed out of the budgets. Because I note expenses go up about 600,000.
Just ask Bryce to comment.
Bryce Hosking, Group Manager of Property and Resource Recovery. That's simply down to because we haven't determined the operating model. So one of the questions we were putting out there as part of the consultation process we're doing at the moment was around opportunities in that space, whereas I suppose the expenditure is a lot more certain because we actually have funding for it now.
Fair enough. So it would be fair to say that the proportionate decrease in revenue from social housing reflected in Table 7 probably isn't entirely accurate because it recognises expenses but not revenue.
Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily not accurate, but yes, it does definitely omit the any revenue that we might get from Summer Hayes.
All right, thank you. If we go over, continuing in item 12, attachment 3 to what is page 26 under the separate cover agenda, the economic development activity financial statements, I note that there's an expenses in there for investment property and a revenue for investment property. I thought I'd just firstly clarify exactly what is classified as investment property under council. Is that for example, the commercial leases that we have underneath the library? Is that our public housing units? Is that something else?
Also probably a question for me. Yes, it is all of our commercial leases, so the tenancies in this building, in the library, and also where we have perhaps purchased a strategic property for a future use that we might have tenanted out to a commercial tenant in the meantime.
Thank you, Bryce. And so, not to be cynical, but an investment generally generates a return. Given this is costing us 760,000 and generating a return of 252, why do we class as an investment property if we're making a negative 300% return on investment? Does that mean we're under-renting, for example, our commercial properties and not passing on the costs that would normally be done in a commercial setting, as an example?
I think the issue is many of our commercial tenancies, so all of our commercial tenancies are at market rates. So we do that every time a rent review is due, we do an assessment. I think the issue is because many of them are actually tied up into a greater building, such as this one or the library, a lot of the costs are all lumped in together, which don't actually reflect those tenancies.
No, that makes sense. Thank you. If we then go carrying on in attachment 3 of item 12 to the Arts, Heritage, Capital, New and Growth on page 45, budgets. I want to reference two documents here, so I'm sorry that's going to get confusing. So we're on page 45 of the separate cover of the agenda, and we're on page 41 of the consultation document, which is the section on we need to strengthen some of our city's favourite facilities. So I notice in attachment 3 that the budget for the Central Library and Te Mano redevelopments is put as 131.6 million, and that we're expecting that 90% of it will be externally funded according to the budget lines in here. I appreciate that might be adjusted for inflation. I notice in the consultation document it's only listed as a $120 million cost, and we're only expecting 80% external funding. So given A, those figures have a $10 million difference, and B, there is a considerable difference between 90 and 80% external funding, I just wondered which one was correct. I mean, it's great. It's positive. 90% would be wonderful. I'm just want to know which is accurate.
That could be a question for me too. So the uninflated figures are 120 million. Without doing the maths here, I suspect maybe that difference could be down to inflation because it's not till years 4, 5, 6, and 7. So that might explain that difference, and maybe someone from finance might correct me there, but I suspect that's probably what it is. And in terms of an assumption, just getting some clarity here from Scott, I thought we had assumed 80%, not 90. But 2 seconds.
No worries. Shall I carry on or shall I wait?
Who's going to respond to that?
Yeah, through the chair, what we'll do, councillor Wood, is that we'll just make sure that we pick up on those and marry those up for the report that will come back on the 14th.
Thank you, Wade. Well, so just, I had a feeling inflation would be the reason, so my question following that then is, should the consultation document reflect the inflated figures or the non-inflated figures? And my, I guess, suggestion would be that it should reflect the inflation figures, given that'll be what the actual cost is at the time. I'm getting a nod, so that's a yes. All right, thank you. And then, yeah, if you could just clarify if we're expecting to seek 80 or 90%, that'd be great. And my final question, yes, my final question is in relation to the consultation document. If you bear with me one moment. On page 21, in the section of we want to be able to move people around and goods around efficiently and safely, there's a list of projects above a cost of 10 million. I note that at the end of last year we had quite a debate about the shared pathways from Ashurst to Palmerston North and Fielding to Palmerston North, and they were budgeted at a cost of 50 million. I see in here they're budgeted at a cost of 31, so I just wanted to see, I know we asked for officers to come back to us with a reduced, or options for a reduced cost. Is that what's happened in this case, or are these uninflated figures, or what is it $19 million cheaper than it was 3 months ago, is what I'm asking.
We're just working through the document here. First of all, the assumption for the seismic buildings at Te Manawa and the library is 90% was assumed, not 80.
Excellent.
So I can answer that one.
So I trust that'll be updated in the... Awesome, thank you.
The work to be considering value engineering options is definitely underway, and I'm hoping, I should be in a position in the next day or so to provide some options there around reducing that cost. That 31 million shown in there, I think might be an error. So based on the current budget, you are correct, it says 55 million, and that's unchanged at this point.
Thank you, so that'll be updated to 55 million for the consultation. Great, thank you, Mr Mayor, thank you, team.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Cam, David, Chris and Debbie. And just a question just in terms of, you sought some feedback towards the end of January, and I submitted an email to you on the 30th. Can you just advise if any of those points that I raised are going to be included in the new consultation document? Thank you.
I think we actioned almost all of them. All of them.
Thank you, Liv. Mr Chair.
Okay, I'll chime in before I go to Councillor Naylor. So my question that I started in the last item, the Public Art and Heritage Objects Plan, is that just sculptures that the city owns, or does it include other heritage items? And I'm talking about other perhaps heritage military heritage sites, other sculpture collections that exist in the city, or is it just purely what the city owns and not the Sculpture Trust? Because some of the wording's quite different.
Helen's going to answer that question.
Thank you. Helen Churton, Manager of Asset Management Planning. It is intended to be something that manages what we own, including some heritage objects that we own.
Okay, so it doesn't include, and there's no scope to include other heritage?
At this point, no. What we were intending to do was have a document that showed how we manage the things that we own.
Right.
For us internally.
Does notable trees come into this here, or is that part of the Parks and Reserves?
No, that is part of something else, possibly Parks and Reserves.
Okay, all right.
Sure.
And with, so I just note on page, well, this page here, It doesn't list all the sculptures and all the things we own.
No,
So,
just a selected few.
okay, so why do we only do a few? And then on the other plans, we list every stormwater manhole and everything else?
At this stage, I'm not sure.
Okay. So,
I know it is easier to say, we own X number of manholes as opposed to the number of sculptures and things that we do own is quite big to fit on the page. The others we can group more easily.
so if the council wanted to list what we own in terms of the sculptures, we can add that.
Potentially, we could look at how easily we were able to accomplish that and come back on the 14th with some suggestions, perhaps.
Okay, and it's just a minor thing, but I think having black on everything is, I'm not sure if it's the best. It just seems quite dark, and that's just a design comment, and I suppose it's a minor thing. But if it was only one page, but it's on every single plan. So yeah, just a comment there. Okay, over to you, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I'll start with page 214. It talks at the top of that page about the fact that we'll get some information in early March about fees and charges. Last year we had been indicated that would come to February meeting. And so I'm just wondering, how does any changes that we make to the fees and charges inform our revenue assumptions if we're confirming our revenue assumptions now?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I think when we're reviewing our fees and charges, you will have the opportunity to alter any of your fees and charges at that time, which may or may not have a material impact on your revenue assumptions. You don't actually adopt the consultation for document for consultation until you've seen those fees and charges. So, but my advice to you would be that you're not going to see a significant shift that it's going to fundamentally change your overall revenue assumptions at this stage.
So if we want a significant shift because the revenue is too low, like at the moment what I'm seeing is that the revenue increase is a lot smaller than the expenses increase. And last year when we had workshops and things came to us in papers talking about the levers that we can use to address the challenges that we have, increasing fees and charges was one of the levers. And I think some of us indicated an interest in using that lever, and some councillors, I think Councillor Harper even suggested some new ones that we don't currently have. And I'm just wondering if we are to increase fees or introduce new fees, is that something we should be including in our consultation document, which we're looking at today, obviously?
Yeah, so we, if we were to introduce new fees, definitely we would want to signal that, I would think, through the consultation document. It is a challenge to actually identify what new fees there would be. That would be material and that can be put in place.
So the conversations that happened in the workshops last year when this was discussed, has any of that been picked up by officers in terms of the thinking or the assumptions that are going into what we get back in March? Or should we have been giving further direction on that before we get that paper back?
So officers are reviewing all the fees and charges at the moment as we speak, so they are working on that. But if there is anything specific that you think we should be delving deeper into, we will happily take your advice on that as well to ensure that we do bring that back when we do bring the whole lot back in March.
Okay, thank you. Just moving to the third recommendation in this paper. that refers to planning assumptions contained in Table 3. Table 3, apologies, but I don't fully understand. Table 3 is at the bottom of page 209, and it's got the total operational revenue increase percentages, which don't seem to align with the revenue increases on page 418 and 419, which is the all of council revenue and expenses. Are you able to explain to me what it is we're approving in recommendation 3? Or what table 3 is, what the relevance of table 3 is to that recommendation?
If you recall, councillor, back in December, I think it was, we noted that to make, I guess, the debt capacity, the available debt capacity work, we had to commit to some overall total revenue increases to create that capacity. All Table 3 is trying to highlight is exactly that, the percentage movement of total revenue across the 10-year period, and it's total operating revenue for this purpose. You'll note that in year one we had a recommendation of 11%, but we've actually found a way to have total operating revenue at 8.1% for year one. And we're not actually bringing in additional debt repayment until year 4 when we were starting to strike some of those capacity issues.
Okay, so if we go to page 418, under total revenue, as compared to this year being 41.1 million, it appears that year one is actually a reduction because that's got 40.2 million. So I'm just wondering, unless I'm not understanding something correctly, but it looks like our revenue is actually reducing from our current year to year one.
I'll start, but I think Scott can add to it. I think the reason behind that is probably around capital revenue assumptions around subsidies and grants.
Would
yeah,
that be included in the whole of council revenue?
That's specifically operating revenue for activities. The page you need to reference is total operating revenue on page 644, which includes rates. So the page that you were looking at excludes rates. Page 644 is the total comprehensive revenue and expenditure for council, which includes rates.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, thank you. So just moving to, so what is it we're, so recommendation 3 is just basically confirming that despite the fact that we endorsed a recommendation previously that said it would be 1177, that we're actually just agreeing that it's less than that. Is that what recommendation 3 is asking us to confirm?
I believe what recommendation 3 is basically bringing back and confirming to you what that profile actually looks like, because at the time we were still pulling together the whole of all the decisions that were made, and I think we said we would come back and say to you how this profile would actually look. So that's all that's doing.
Okay, so we don't have to overturn the previous decision in order to do that. Okay, thank you. Just moving to page 214, which outlines the request and recommendation 4 to adjust our policy settings for animal control and social housing. The conference and function centre is also included in there in showing that year one is looking to only get 47% revenue as opposed to the policy being 60 to 79. And there's a comment that's currently being looked at. The fact that we haven't got that included in our recommendation is the assumption that we're leaving the policy setting at 60 to 79, so council officers will be finding a way to adjust the model to accommodate that.
That's what we are planning for at the moment. We're investigating the reasoning behind that. And if we do need to adjust this policy setting, we'd bring that back to you.
Yeah.
But we would rather understand it more and look at the opportunity to get back to the policy as the first instance.
Okay, thank you. And for the two that have been proposed to be changed, animal control and social housing, the chart on page 215 under social housing, that down the bottom on the right-hand side, that talks about council could request more information on the implications of this versus the other option be provided for the 14th of February, which is only a week away. If we were to request that further information to help inform a decision, would that be available for next week's meeting?
I'd have to confirm with you that, I guess what we could do is give you an indication of what the rents would have to be for that to meet the current policy limit. But you already have a policy in place at the, that signals that rents will be held at 25%. Yeah. So to comply with that policy, we would have to adjust the revenue and financing policy as is suggested.
Well, what if, given the conversation we had in the previous item where perhaps the conversation is a bit broader than just the rents, it's about actually how do we attract the income-related rent subsidy and looking at different models. If that is our interest to look at different models to perhaps meet some of this shortfall, what would be the best process for us to get that information back, as Councillor Johnson has said, understand the pros and cons of that prior to making any decision about, because we're being asked to change a policy setting here before we've had the information back that some of us have asked for.
Yeah, I think that's a much bigger piece of work to look at the different operating models of the activity. We obviously are out for expressions of interest on a particular property at the moment, which may give us some insights as to what is possible. And then from there, my advice to you would be from there that we would then explore or make decisions upon whether you want to explore particular operating models or expand beyond that expression of interest. And I think that would be the appropriate time. It would not be a quick piece of work to turn that around. So I wouldn't be able to tell you what the implications of a different operating model is by next week. That's going to take quite some time.
Okay, thank you. So in order, based on the information in table 7 on page 214, we're operating below our policy settings now anyway, by the looks of things. Do we need to set our policy in concrete now? Do we need to shift our policy? If we've got work underway to try and remedy the shortfall and remain within our policies, but that information will take a while to come back, can we defer changing our policy settings until after such time as that we've got the information in front of us to help inform looking at how we could perhaps work within the current policy?
That is always an option for you, that you can I guess adopt to be outside of a policy setting. I guess until we've done that piece of work, we won't know whether that piece of work in itself will get fully back to that policy setting. My understanding is that even with the recommendation for adjusting the social housing policy setting, that we are still some way away from actually being able to be back up into the policy setting that it is at the moment. So I guess that's a choice you do have, but if you would like to comply with the policy setting and the rent policy as well, that is a change that you would need to make now, and you can always change it again at some point if we've gone through that piece of work.
So it is
because we're going to have to consult on, we'd have to consult on that piece of work anyhow, and we could consult on a change to the revenue and financing policy as a result.
So we can just not, so am I correct to understand we can leave the policy as it is and just not comply with it in the meantime while we're looking at the work. Is that
You
correct?
can do that.
Yeah.
It would just be noted that if we don't comply with revenue and
Right.
financing policy for that particular activity.
Yeah, okay. And in terms of the animal control, which is a similar situation, it seems, the information that we've got in this paper is quite different to what we had been told last year, where anyway, so we've been told that dog registration fees will increase. We don't know how much. I don't know how much. But then we've been asked to change the policy before we've seen the fees and charges information to help inform a decision about whether we really need to do that. I guess, could we ask for the further information for the animal control, look at the options before locking in a change of policy for that as well, in a similar way to the social housing?
You could always assess what it would, what the fee would need to be within the current policy settings as part of the fees and charges work. You could do that and then make a decision as you're adopting the consultation document for consultation then as to whether you do or do not proceed with a policy change.
Yep.
I do know that the rationale behind the change in the cost structure for the activity is because of the debt repayment associated with the new facility. My understanding is it would be a fairly significant shift in the fees, animal control fees, to get back to that level of compliance.
Yep. Okay, thank you. I'll just indicate, Mr. Mayor, that I do have a couple of alternate recommendations in replacement of recommendation 4 to test the waters to get further information back on just the two, the animal control and the social housing, prior to changing the policy setting. I do have a few other questions that relate to the consultation document. Are we covering all of the consultation document? Mr. Mayor, how would you like us to give feedback for the consultation document? Is that in questions or is that in comments?
Well, if we can do it quickly now, if there's anything that's...
Yeah, I do have, it feels like, that just feels like a bit more of a comment because the feedback, I do have some feedback around the consultation document, but so I can give that now?
If it's a comment, we'll leave it to comments.
Okay, are we dealing with that separately or together with?
It'll be together with the recommendations
Okay.
there.
Okay, so on page 23 of the consultation document, there's under the housing, there's an $18 million investment in Huia Street housing. What is the corresponding revenue assumptions for that program, for that project? Because I couldn't see any revenue in the housing that seemed to align with that investment.
There currently isn't any revenue assumption in there for that, simply because there's a lot of decisions to be made around what kind of housing will actually be built. Whether it will be a bit more like a tamakuku and actually looking to generate revenue, it could be used for social housing, etc. So there's quite a few decisions to be made and uncertainty, hence no assumption for revenue.
So how did we get to the 18 million amount for how much we were thinking of investing if there's that level of uncertainty?
It's a placeholder budget amount based on other developments that we've done, such as Tamakuku and Summer Haze, for instance, as a comparable size.
Okay, so how many other placeholder budgets are in our plan that don't have corresponding revenue that would likely have corresponding revenue once the program progresses? Is that an isolated incident, or is there other? I think Councillor Wood asked a question about another thing and it was a similar answer. Are there many other situations that there would be likely revenue to offset the costs that aren't included in our revenue assumptions?
I'm not sure if I can answer across the entire portfolio. The The housing investment space, for instance, and developments like at Huia and the likes are a little bit different in terms of there are a number of tangible outcomes and decisions that need to be made that will drive different outcomes, such as whether you used it for social housing or whether you look to create units and sell them or do it to sections. So there's quite a bit of uncertainty there, hence no assumption being made because it could be quite considerably wrong. Hence we've also pushed Huia right out to the back end of the 10-year period, years 9 and 10, to give plenty of time to reconsider that through future LTPs as well. I'm not sure across the rest of the portfolio though around any missed revenue opportunities. I guess all I can say, having looking after quite a bit of the programs through transport, property and resource recovery, where there has been an opportunity to try and identify revenue or look at opportunities there, we've definitely looked to make that assumption.
Okay, thank you. A question I have is looking at the consultation document and the supporting information, where would I find the total capital program amount identified? Is that anywhere in the consultation document? I couldn't see it, but... And is it somewhere in the commentary, in the supporting information? Or is it going to be on the blank page that's...
I think it's going to be in those placeholder pages in the finance section at the back of the CD.
At the back? Come and have a chat. I guess I'm looking for the high-level financials. I haven't been able to find that. Is there any intention to have some high-level financials somewhere in the consultation document?
Yeah, so the consultation document at the moment has some high-level information around the operating picture, but we could put something to the effect of the total capital size of the total capital program in as well.
That would be good, thank you. And the page, oh, sorry. The page where the community hubs are, page 33, those six squares with the pictures on them, would it be possible to include the costings on each of those? Yeah, just because it's quite hard to find when it's right in the fine print. That would be good. And in terms of the reading age target that has been assumed in putting this document together, in the past, we've been told, it should be targeted to a 10-year-old, that a 10-year-old should be able to pick it up and understand it. Do you think that this currently meets that target?
Yeah, so the government standard is 12 years. I think it is, look, there's always opportunities to make things easier to explain, and I think finance especially has had me in the air trying to explain especially the finances and the rates bit a lot easier. That's the kind of thing, if you've got suggestions, I'm more than happy, to hear it.
Thank you. I do have quite a few suggestions, but, is there a process we can use offline for can we approve some minor edits, or do we want to use time today to be going through the detailed stuff?
In the past, Councillor, we've fed those through. Now, not everybody agrees with what one particular councillor says is a minor edit, so you need to use your political acumen to understand what that is. If it's something that's a bit more of a change, then I think it needs to come through the chamber. I'm just a bit wary of time, so we might break for a morning break now, and we'll come back to you, Councillor, if you have a lot more questions. We've got other councillors in the queue for questions as well. So, look, we'll adjourn the meeting till 20 past for those online as well. We will have to adjourn the meeting then at 12. We go to culture and sport, and then I'm hopeful that we can get through the second part of the meeting afterwards. All right, thank you. Kia ora tātou, welcome back everybody. And we'll continue our questions of item 12 around the LTP consultation document. But while I've got the room, our auditor, Debbie, has to leave at midday. So if there are any, she's been with us all morning, so if there are any questions specifically pertaining to the audit, then we'll do those before 12. Otherwise, unfortunately, you have other business here. Okay, all right, back to you, Councillor Naylor.
Actually, I think I'll leave it there for now, Mr. Mayor. I think the rest is just comments in terms of the consultation documents. I'll leave that for comment.
Okay. All right. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to all who are here to answer questions. I do have a couple questions for you, Debbie. You're probably already aware this is our first substantial foray into the world of off-balance sheet debt. And I just wanted to understand in general how Audit New Zealand approaches off-balance sheet proposals and assessing their viability.
We haven't seen what you've proposed yet, but we have had discussions. So there are a number of other councils that do have off-balance sheet debt that have used this facility. I was part of some of those discussions as a peer review, and so we will look at how you've structured it, what you're planning. We'll look at the disclosures that you have around any uncertainty, and also the disclosures, I suppose, around rates versus the levy that you may receive. So rather than, and I suppose it's an important thing for council to also consider, not just to focus on the rates increase, but on the total cost to the ratepayer.
Thank you. So on that total cost to the community or to the ratepayers, is your consideration of off-balance sheet proposals inclusive of cost to community, or do you really just take a cost to council kind of lens to things?
So we're really looking, excuse me, at how council communicates that total cost to the community, excuse me, rather than, so we're looking at, does the LTP fairly reflect the funding mechanism that you've got, but also how it describes. We don't look at it, excuse me, is council made a, the policy decision, we don't comment on the policy that you have, but we really look at, is it fairly reflected and is it fairly described to the community?
Yeah. Thank you, that's most helpful. Also wanted to ask Debbie around kind of, not real sure where the question goes here, but in general, accounting standards around climate-related risks and how those are dealt with. These are, as we know, low probability but high impact kind of events that we have to think about. What expectations does Audit New Zealand have around approaching climate-related events?
Yeah, so we will look at the assumptions that you have around climate-related events and the likelihood, there is some risk around when things will happen, what will happen. So it is really the underlying assumptions that council has, the impact of those and whether it's likely or probable or otherwise. We'll also look at the assumptions that you have around dealing with either mitigation or adaptation of climate change. Also, your non-financial performance framework, whether you've got any targets that you're looking to put in the long-term plan, really making sure, I suppose, that they're fairly reflected, but also that you can actually measure them and that you do have a process of measuring them. And I'm thinking of the level of scope 1, 2, or 3, 4 emissions, if you're going down that route, that you can actually measure them appropriately.
Thank you. And finally for you, it sounds like this new approach has the potential to be quite highly iterative. I'm just wondering, from Audit New Zealand's perspective, is it likely to become highly iterative, or will there only really be a couple touch points between here and June?
So what we are looking at doing is staying with the same timetable that we had, so which is late-ish February coming in, which would have enabled you to have adopted an audited CD. But we're still going to keep with that same timetable, so we'll still be doing the work behind the scenes. The only thing, so that would allow, if we had any concerns around any of those assumptions that you've got or anything like that, we'd be able to raise those. We will provide a report back to council with the work that we did at that period, which will also highlight anything so that you could then consider it for your LTP. So the work that we have to do hasn't changed. It's just probably the only difference is the fact that we don't give a physical opinion over the consultation document, just because of the timeframes to get things through.
Great, thank you for those. A couple of questions for officers as well. There was an earlier draft of the consultation document that came around on email asking for feedback. And in that, one of the goal 4 outcomes that was referred to was around infrastructure that was designed, quote, to manage projected 1 in 50-year flood events. That language has now been generalized, but I would like to understand, are we designing our infrastructure only to a 1 in 50-year event standard?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, there was a little bit of discussion internally after that question was raised, and we've made some adjustment which has generalised it. I think the question did highlight that it's an incredibly complex area. So infrastructure, I mean, a resilient city is I guess my first reflection was a resilient city is more than just infrastructure, it's about development as well. So when you look at engineering standards, the one plan, asset management plans, the design standard that we're working to for infrastructure and new development will vary depending on location risk. So I don't think it's appropriate in a strategy or consultation document to start sort of turning it into an engineering standards or a regional policy statement. For instance, the regional policy statement on flood risk management goes to 2 pages of policy about how we will assess and manage risk for new development infrastructure. So while it's been generalised and that may not provide, potentially could be criticised providing a lesser level of certainty to people, I think the flip side is if you become very specific, it's going to become quite long. Because for instance, we had advice from Helen and her team that, when you design a road and when that will fill up with water versus when you design a development versus when you design infrastructure, the return period that we're working to will vary on a case-by-case basis. So we have generalised it. We think that's a more accurate description of how we're actually managing risk, even though it's not specific.
Great, thank you, David, for that response. A question around tables 2 and tables 3 in the actual covering paper. One of those tables outlines the rates increase over 10 years, and one of those tables outlines the revenue increase over the 10 years. And it seems to me, looking at those 2 tables, the rates increase outstrips the revenue increase. So are we seeing an expectation of an increased portion of council revenue coming from rates over the 10 years? Or am I not interpreting those tables correctly?
Through Mr. Mayor, I think one of the things with when you look at the revenue as a whole, rates obviously does form a significant portion of the overall total revenue. So that does tend to have a sizable increase. But I think also when you think about the rates increases, they are a reflection also of where the increase in investments are, and in a lot of cases they have been across the general rated activities. So things like debt and interest servicing is a predominant driver for which, whilst we're inflation increasing our fees and charges, the movement in debt and interest throughout this 10-year plan is more than what would be an inflationary movement. So that's probably what you're seeing there is the additional cost really to fund that the debt and interest on councils overall.
So do we have any policy control in place, or is there potential to introduce policy control that would basically keep a steady balance over 10 years between how much of the overall revenue package is rates versus how much of it is non-rates revenue? Because it does seem that we're veering towards a higher reliance on rates revenue.
Yeah, so we don't have a policy specific. We have the revenue and financing policy, which gives broad ranges of public versus user pays type scenario. I think what this is reflecting is where the types of investment are, which are predominantly in areas that don't have alternative revenue streams for them. So that's why you're seeing more in the rate space. The finance strategy, though, does talk about, and we've made a point of mentioning in there that we will be looking at a piece of work around how could we, I guess, look at alternative revenue streams and being quite focused on looking at that to see if there are opportunities. That will take a piece of time to do that. But we do understand the importance of trying to, I guess, find all levers that combine to funding council's operations, whether it's rates or other revenue. So that is a key component that we're looking at in this finance strategy.
Thank you. Finally, Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to inquire, somewhat trepidatiously, but we will go here, around the animal control and management approach. And that it does seem we're a bit letting the tail wag the dog in terms of how we approach that particular finance. Did we consider kind of just excluding the building and kind of having that policy focused more on the operations and the day-to-day service, rather than actually trying to reset something that is quite a long-standing and well-accepted standard within the community?
The challenge with the revenue and financing policies is they are designed to describe the total cost of an activity. So whilst you know, if you were to take the building away from the activity, the argument would be, well, actually, would the building exist if the activity didn't exist? So that's why it's included within the total cost of operating that activity. The debt wouldn't potentially exist if we weren't undertaking animal control services.
But, well, I guess hypothetically, I mean, if somebody else had built us a building and leased it, it would be a very different picture than what we're seeing here, potentially. So I'm just trying to understand why we're kind of holding ourselves to something that is quite awkward, it feels to me.
That would depend upon what the level of lease charging back to us would be, because if someone built it for us, arguments that we didn't own the facility and we were leasing it, I would presume that the lease that would be charged to us would be a reflection of the cost of building and maintaining it. So it would probably come through in another line in the cost of the activity in some form, depending on the quality and standard of the building that would have been leased. But if it was exactly like for like, I'd imagine there'd probably be similarities in which whoever's providing us the building would want to recover their costs of investing in that building.
Thank you all. Appreciate it, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, I'm on. Thank you. The question I have relates to just trying to find it again now, sorry. The change that's proposed, 7.10 on page 211, it indicates the change that's proposed to the policy for the, rates affordability, and it's got the increase, it's got the change to that last bullet point, plus increase in funding requirement for interest and debt repayment, that replacing what used to be the increase in funding required for asset renewal. Is that, I just couldn't see that in the recommendations. Is that something we will be asked to endorse, or is that just being put in there? Is that change just being made? I'm just trying to understand the process of whether when we get a chance to decide whether to accept that, what's proposed there.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, I guess the opportunity to debate and discuss that is now. It's a limit that forms part of the finance strategy, which is part of the supporting documentation that you're being asked to consider. And I guess the rationale behind the change is to reflect that the debt costs on council is a key driver of increases over this period of time, and the fact that we did put in, I guess, a strategy in the financing strategy around funding accelerated debt repayment to ensure that we've got the capacity and the debt headroom. And so that was one way in which a practical way in which we thought we could actually disclose what we're trying to do.
So if we're not comfortable with that change, would the only option be to make an amendment to the supporting information?
You could put an alternative recommendation up specific to the rates limit, yes.
Okay, thank you. And my second question relates to nature calls. Reading the document and really taking in the impact of what the latest financials are that have been included in terms of the $1,000 per year, which is quite a lot more than what we kind of had been indicated previously. Looking at page 18 of the consultation document, it's talking here about buying or leasing. It says about 700 hectares, and I recall when the decision was made in September 21 that the recommendation was that the 700 was a cap, that was the maximum amount. But I'm just wondering, are we costing this project on that full amount, and if so, why? Because I think that what was expressed very clearly through that debate was the hope that it could be quite a lot less than that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I guess at the moment we're working with the best information we have, and that's probably the best we can say. We'll continue to look at options to reduce the cost as much as we can, obviously, and part of that will be, really examining some of those assumptions and trying to make sure they're as accurate as they can. Ultimately, we need to build what is in what we get consented for. So that the challenge at the moment is trying to anticipate what we think, the final design will be. And look, and I come back to at the moment, we're working with the best information we can, but we will continue to sort of, to work on that over time.
Is the best information that we have that we will need all 700 hectares?
Well, potentially we may need all 700 hectares. At the moment, we don't have anything to put a definitive number on that.
Okay, so the next page talks about if the program is unable to be funded, up on the right-hand side, that we would, through the IFF, that we'd need to, that the program would be unlikely to be able to proceed in its current form. So if we're looking at alternate form other than its current form, could that include a treatment program that has less land and less pipes?
So look, I think we will continue to investigate a number of options that might significantly reduce the amount of land that is needed. But at the end of the day, if we want to significantly change, you know, what we assume we're going to build, then we may well need to, you know, go and get it reconsented. So ultimately, there is a link. Those two things are inextricably linked, and we need to have a consent to cover what we're going to ultimately build.
So if we get a consent but we can't pay for it, then what then?
Well, I think hopefully before we get to the end of that process, we've narrowed down some of those options and made sure they're in the consent. So we can work through that as we're going through the consenting process.
So how proactive is the efforts that are being made to look at options to reduce that cost at this point so that that can be included in the consent process?
Yes, they are. Yes, we are. We're actively working on it. Actively, yeah.
Because the cost...
So councillor, there's a steering group which has industry, business, community, councillors feeding into that, and that work's already started. So they all share the same issues that you're alluding to, but it's very hard to put a definitive number around that right at the moment. I think I echo the words of the officers that they're just, for the information they've got, and they have to put the worst case scenario out there, and that's what it is.
Why are we putting the worst case scenario out there?
Well, when you're budgeting for things, you've got to be quite conservative for things, and you put the total cost.
And just my last question that relates to this, the percentages that have been outlined for the rates increase, my understanding is that doesn't include the $1,000 levy?
Correct, yes.
And so if that kicks in at year 4, has anyone worked out what sort of percentage on an average residential ratepayer that percent increase would be at year 4 with the rates increase plus the $1,000?
The thing with the $1,000 is what we have calculated once the full project levy is in place. But that would be phased in over the construction period of the plant, and the exact timing of what that looks like will depend on the timing of when the debt is required to build the plant. It won't necessarily all be in 1 year, so it could be over 3 or 4 years that's progressively phased in, depending on what those timing of construction looks like.
Okay, so I thought I had read year 4 somewhere, but is it? So in terms of, has that additional $1,000, if it's gradually over a few years, has that been, is there anywhere that we can kind of see the impact of that compounded with the rates increase for those years that it will hit? Because we've got rates increases here in the consultation document, and then somewhere it says about the 1,000, but is there anywhere that shows perhaps the cumulative effect of both of those?
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult to be able to give that definitively, because there are some decisions that we still would need to be making in terms of how that levy would fall across the property base. What is the mechanism for charging it out? Is it going to be based on a fixed charge, or a mix of, or a general rate component, or a mix of both? So it's really hard for us to be able to communicate exactly how that's going to fall to the individual until we work through that series of decisions to be able to give anything of any sort of meaning to a property.
Okay, thank you. That's all from me.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Councillor Johnson.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I thought I was in the queue there. Just have some questions about the what's included, I suppose, in the calculations for Table 7, which is the user fees versus revenue and financing policy table. So you've indicated that for the animal control area of activity, that the costs of the interest repayments on the new animal shelter are included as part of the operating activity. So for social housing, is the cost of the interest on the new housing at Papaioa Place included in the cost of the activity?
Yes.
Okay. And so for cemeteries, is the cost of the new building there also included?
Yes.
Yeah, so we've been consistent in that. Okay, that's good. And so then the other question I have is, when deciding on the policy band, am I correct in understanding that it's a balance of how much individual benefit is derived from the activity versus the public good? Is that how the decision's made?
Yes, that's very much front of mind when we're thinking about these things.
So what's the guideline for determining that it be 80 to 100 versus 60 to 80? You know, let's not look at how it matches up with our policy, but how do we decide in the first place which band it would sit in?
Yeah, so that is I guess that's a decision for the council to determine. But it's I guess the more you get into the middle area of is it a full private benefit versus partial private, partial public good? There is, I guess, an element of subjectivity in there around where you deem that right mix sits. So if I use an example of animal control, there you could say that the previous thinking may have been that all dog owners benefit, so they pay the lion's share. That's why 80 to 100 or closer to 100. But some may argue that actually there's a public good to this because it's those dogs who are not necessarily registered or what have you that are causing some issues, and there's a public good to safety and that sort of thing. So there is a bit of subjectiveness around where you feel that should sit.
Okay. And the officer's recommendation that we adjust the policy band for animal control and social housing, is that based on a reassessment of where the public-private good balance lies, or is it more a pragmatic decision because the revenue isn't fitting into our policy setting?
Yeah, I think there's possibly a mixture there, but I'd say like the example around animal control, there is some thought to say there is public good to having a facility like what's being invested in, and I guess even investing in more social housing and that sort of thing that's driving the debt repayments. There could be a view where you could say there is some public benefit to the overall good to providing that service. So I guess it just depends where you sit in terms of that.
Okay, I understand that. So in terms of the obligations that we have legally, I mean, we're legally obligated to provide a dog pound, aren't we?
I believe so, yes.
So even if there was not a single dog registered in Palmerston North, we would still have to provide a dog pound, wouldn't we?
I believe there would have to be some form of service, yes.
Mm. So how do we square that with other things that are not legally obligated? So we've got legal obligations around the crematorium service, I understand, but we don't have, say, legal obligations around housing. So how does that make a difference to the policy setting?
Again, I think it comes down to who you feel. The policy really is about who is the benefactor from the service rather than the legal obligations and your feeling of who then should pay.
Right. Thank you. That's very clear. Thank you.
All right. I think, are there any further questions before we... Okay, there is none. All right. We'll go to Councillor Naylor's amendments first because they sort of dictate everything else from there, depending whether they're successful or not. So if we could get those up, please.
Could we get those up on that screen? Because
Yeah.
that one's a bit far.
And Debbie, if you need to shoot away, then please just slip out quietly. Yeah, thank you. Okay, all right. So we have two here, and this around the CE provide options to deliver social housing within the current policy limit, and until such time council agrees to operate outside of the current policy limit, and then the CE provides options to provide animal control services within the current policy limit. Councillor Naylor.
Excuse me, Mr Mayor, sorry. Just before we go to Councillor Naylor, are these alternative recommendations then rather than additional?
Alternate to number 4.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I understand that these two will be taken separately, but I'm happy to speak to both. This was teased out a little bit through the question time. It's clear that currently we are not able to meet our policy limits. That's shown clearly in the papers. However, we've heard from the Chief Executive that there is work underway that might take some time to look at other models, to look at our assets and look at how we can perhaps get on a more financially sustainable pathway. And in terms of social housing, I think, as I've said around this table before, I think it's very clear that this table is very united on our desire to provide social housing to our community, and we've identified it as a really high priority. How we fund that, how we pay for that is still yet to be determined, and that is what is really up for debate. And my motivation for really trying to push this to the fore, to be looked at, is not any, it's because I'm interested if we find a financially sustainable model, that we might actually be able to provide more social housing to our community. At the moment, this paper is asking us to approve that ratepayers increase their subsidisation of housing from up to 20% to up to 40%, but as the paper shows us, in years 2 and 3, it goes outside of that. It would be more than 40% that our ratepayers will need to subsidise. And as has already been alluded, the fact that councils do not attract the income-related subsidy is a really, it makes the current model a little bit deficient in terms of the reliance that we have on asking for more and more from our ratepayers when we could actually get that money directly from the government if we adopted a different model. Councillor Johnson's correct that we have looked at this before. I think it was about 7 years ago. It was a very interesting debate at that point, and definitely some things have shifted since then. Primarily, at the moment, we've got a paper in front of us asking us to ask more from our community, significantly more, to be able to provide that. When there is actual funding available, if we took a different model, for the government to fund that, and at a time where we're putting up to 50% rates increase over the next few years onto our community, I think we need to be doing everything we can to look at how we can source additional or alternate revenue sources for things that are important to us, and social housing is definitely one of those things. So this recommendation is acknowledging the work that the Chief Executive has said is already underway, that there will be some options considered. But what I'm asking is that instead of us simply endorsing a change to the policy, which basically says, yes, we accept that our community will just have to pay more for us to do this. This is us being a little bit more proactive in that regard to say, let's keep the policy settings as they are, and let's look more broadly at what the options are for us to move on to a financially sustainable model for the delivery of our social housing. So I acknowledge this is not something that will come back next week. If it's supported, it may well take quite a few months, as the Chief Executive has already outlined. But my suggestion is that we accept that we operate outside of the current policy in the meantime while we pursue other options. I'd really urge you to support this, and I'd really, you know, this has been a part of our conversation in workshops. It hasn't transferred to direction specifically given from the council chamber in the form of a meeting. This is an opportunity to do that. As the Chief Executive has said, this work is already underway, but it just solidifies that, and I guess gives an intent to the community that no, we're not going to ask you at this point to up your subsidisation. We're going to look actively at other models so that we can look to do this more effectively going forward. And I'll speak to the animal control one now too, do it both together. So yes, this one is a really tricky one, and as has been teased out by Councillor Johnson in the questions, there is an element to public good, but there is also, owning an animal, there is also an element of choice. As with cemeteries, we don't all decide when we get to die, but we do get to decide whether we can afford to own an animal. And moving this policy to asking more from our community to subsidise this up to 40% is asking some of the people in our community who can't afford to own an animal to subsidise those who can afford to own an animal. And at this time, where the rates increase is what it is proposed to be, I don't think that's a fair thing for us to ask of our community. In terms of the options to provide animal control services within the current policy limit, I guess I'm indicating that I'm hoping for broad options in that regard, looking at revenue and expenses. We've had reports showing quite a significant surplus of capacity that the animal shelter might have. I don't know if that is space that can be used by neighbouring councils. I don't know. There might be a myriad of things that could be done to look at a more sustainable model for our animal control. It may well also be a part of looking at the fees and charges that are coming back in March. It may be a combination of a number of things, but this is once again indicating that I think we should not be asking our community to subsidise 40% for that. I'm comfortable with up to 20%, as there is some public good in terms of the dog control side of things, but I think the predominant amount of revenue currently comes from the dog registration fees. Someone will correct me if I'm wrong there, but the dog registration fees are for those people who choose to have a dog who feel that they can afford that luxury, and sometimes it is a bit of a luxury. I don't think we should be asking those who can't afford that to subsidise those people.
All right, hands up, anybody else would like to speak? Councillor Johnson.
I'm starting to feel like a broken record in this chamber, but anyway, I'm not going to be supporting either of these things. Firstly, let's look at the social housing one. Every few years, someone comes along with a bright idea that we can change the model and get money from government. But I'll just remind you that it isn't money from government, actually. It's money from taxpayers. And those taxpayers live in Palmerston North. They're the same people that pay taxes as pay rates. So it's just a circular argument about where the money comes from. We looked at this in great detail a couple of terms ago. We commissioned an external consultant to do a report. The report came back and there were so many fishhooks in it around stranded assets, around being able to find a community housing provider that would be able to be interested in providing the service. It was not going to be sustainable even for community housing providers to provide this service. And so I just don't see why we would be doing this all over again. The other factor in this is that every time that someone suggests changing the model of social housing, every single one of our tenants is upset. They're worried, they're concerned about how their rents might change, and more to the point, how their landlord might change. And I think it's very important to understand that council is considered a good landlord. People are concerned if the model was changed to a community housing provider, which is the only other way of changing it, to be able to avail yourself of the government subsidy, that we then lose control of how our tenants are managed, of the level of service that we provide, and also we lose control of the assets themselves that ratepayers over many generations have paid for. So I'm really not in favour of doing this. I'm not in favour of the upset it will cause to even consider it. And I would suggest that we follow the staff advice and change the policy setting to the 60 to 79%. Now, in terms of the animal control services, I do think here that the balance of good lies significantly in favour of the public, because the fact is that we have a statutory duty to provide these services. If there were only a handful of dogs registered in Palmerston North, we would still have to provide the service. And those handful of dog owners wouldn't be able to afford to pay for it at any kind of a level, let alone the 80 to 100% level. So this is a service that we have to provide. And in fact, many dog owners say to me, well, I pay my registration fees, but I don't get anything for it. And they don't, because they look after their animals. And it's people who don't register their dogs, generally, whose dogs end up in the pound, or whose dogs are, straying, etc., and they don't come and redeem them. So I just think that when you look at where does the good lie here, the good in terms of the animal management is much more related into the public good than it is a private good. And so I, for that reason, support it being changed to the 60 to 79%. And in fact, it brings it in line with cemeteries and the conference and function centre. So I think at this stage, there's enough work on our staff's plate without repeating work that's been done a few years ago and without looking into charging good dog owners more for providing a facility that we have to provide under statute. So I'd encourage you to vote against these. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. Brief comment on both of these. The first recommendation, the Chief Executive is actually already doing the first half of that anyhow. So the real question is whether we want, as a council, to ignore the simple reality that's in front of us, that is the sum of decisions that we have made over a number of months, which I think is the better thing to do, or do we want to start creating policy loopholes rather than actually saying the policy is what the policy is? We're far better to acknowledge that over a number of months we have made a series of decisions, and that series of decisions has led us to an indication of the proportion that the public will need to be contributing within the draft plan. And I'd much rather that we are simply upfront about that. We've made some decisions over time. They lead us to this proportion, and can we please have some community feedback about that, rather than setting a precedent of creating loopholes in revenue and finance policies. I do not think loopholes are helpful at all when we have policies. The second recommendation, on the face of it, it's very appealing, actually. Yeah, let's find some extra ways to look at this. But I think when you actually look at the reality of it, the officer's comments in the report is actually quite on point. There would be significant additional costs. We're talking twofold, threefold, multiples. So do we want to really go out and propose that we're going to triple dog fee registrations? I mean, that's probably not a good use of our time as a council, and I don't think a good use of the community's time either. I think we're far better to simply acknowledge that the sum of our decisions, which includes ensuring that we have facilities that are suitable for the needs of the community, have resulted in a different ratio. That's just a simple reality we share with the community, and we get their feedback on that, rather than either doing something that I think is quite politically unwise and won't end that well really for any of us, going out and saying we want to triple dog tag fees, or kind of imagining that somebody else is going to want to use that facility and contribute in a very high regard to its costs. So, on the face of it, looks very appealing, but I'm unable to support the second recommendation either, and would encourage colleagues to vote against both for those reasons. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just want to speak on this. Start by saying I find the process, it's a little bit difficult to make a decision on changing the policy before we've heard what the options are, might be to achieve the policy in its current state. So when I read this initially, I thought it seemed a little bit strange, particularly when we don't have our fees and charges policy back to us. We would make a decision in advance of that. For what Councillor Barrett quite rightly says, we don't know what the fees and charges would have to be for our dog control and animal management to keep us in the current policy setting. I don't know where tripling it's come from. I mean, if we're going to be reaching 60%, you wouldn't need to triple that to reach 80%. So I certainly wasn't thinking it would be there, but it speaks to the point that we don't have the information in front of us to have an educated debate about what we would actually be sacrificing by making this decision. So the intention here is that we get the information, and then we quite well, if it comes back and says dog registration fee is going to be triple, well, we might quite rightly decide we're not going to propose that. But if it comes back and says the general registration might go from 165 to 225, well, we might make that decision to go out and consult on that. So I think it's important that we have good information in front of us rather than just me throwing out a figure of saying I think it's 225 and Councillor Barrett saying it might be 400 or it might, we actually just don't know. So this is requesting that information comes back to us. So I want to firstly talk about the housing aspect of this, and the underlying principle of this is that the more revenue we generate per social housing unit, and I don't mean from the individuals, I mean from things such as the income-related rent subsidy, the more we can provide. And so, for me, this comes from a space of the provision of additional social housing, not from a space of trying to just make as much money as possible. Why discuss it now? Because I think it's important we give direction to our officers what we want to do. If we decide today we don't want to look at an alternative model, that's fine. That's the decision of council. Why waste officers' time going out and investigating all of it if we don't want to do it? But if the majority of us are interested in having that information so we can then make a decision, then we make that call now. So I think it's a good time to discuss it. I think in terms of the comment made by Councillor Johnson that taxes versus rates is a circular argument, I disagree. Otherwise, why would we be applying for co-funding, for example, if taxes and rates are the same thing? I mean, yes, somebody has to pay for it at the end of the day, but we're trying to balance books here. So I think it does matter where the source of income come from and where that co-funding comes from. So I think it is valid to look at the income-related rent subsidy. In terms of who in the community housing sector would do it, firstly, the community housing sector has come a long way in the last 7 years. And secondly, Christchurch has done it, so it certainly is possible. It might not be something that's appealing to us. It might be something where we get the pros and we go, actually, we don't want to give up that control and make that sacrifice. But unless we have the information in front of us, and I respect that it's been discussed before, and a lot of things we debate in this chamber are things that have been debated before, but we've got 5 new councils this term, and if it has truly been 7 years since we do it, there's a number of changes that have happened, both in the amount of social housing we provide, in the councils around the table, and in the housing environment we find ourselves in. I respect what Councillor Johnson says, that tenants would be upset. And I really do sympathise with that. And I'm not saying today we decide that we're going to make this change and cause that angst. But people living in cars and hotels are also upset. And if we can provide more social housing as a result of this, of course people are resistant to change. I'm resistant to change. Heck, and I'm 22. Lots of people, no matter your age, no matter your circumstance, can find change uncomfortable. And it might be something that is too uncomfortable for us to do in the community. We don't know what that will be until we do that consultation. But if this can help us to provide 20% more social housing than we are today, then I think that's worth it. But I don't know that for a fact. So yet again, this is saying, why don't we get the information before we make a decision? We're currently operating outside our policy limits, so I don't think, as Councillor Barrett says, this is creating a loophole. We're already doing it. We're operating outside of our policy limit with the rate increase we did last year. We're operating outside our policy limit in currently what we're doing with with the conference centre. So we operate outside lots of our policy limits without it being classed as a loophole. That's just what we're doing because of the reality we face. This isn't saying that we do that long term. This is just saying we make that call to give us the time and space we need to make a decision with good information. In terms of animal control, because I realise I'm running out of time, look, the comment made by officers was that there would have to be a significant increase in the cost of the fees and charges for dog registration. Yes, there would be. There's also going to be a significant increase in the rates we have to take from our community to provide the subsidy. So at the end of the day, there's a significant cost either way, and I'm of the view that I would rather there was a fairly significant shift in the fees and charges rather than a significant shift in the subsidy we provide. I think that it's, I think that as Councillor Naylor says, it's the right, or it's the responsibility of the individuals who choose to own animals and choose to own dogs that should stump the majority of the cost, rather than asking those who don't have the ability to own animals to pay for it. I recognise there absolutely is a public good, and so there should be an element of public funding, but I think at the very least give us till March to get this information come back in fees and charges, and as Councillor Barrett rightly points out, if it's going to be a radical increase 2- or 3-fold, then at that time we'll make that call. But until we have that information, it's hard to make that decision. So
I hope you support both of these.
Councillors, I'll keep it brief before I go back to your right of reply. Look, I think everybody's made really valid comments, actually, and I think it is quite wise. I'm going to support both just to see what the information is and then make some judgment calls thereafter. Things have changed a little bit around the social housing, but Councillor Johnson's right, there is real pros and cons there. We do lose control. We do lose a whole lot of stuff, and we've just seen it when things go into a CCO, how it sometimes is they can act in possibly a different way to where we want things to go. So, but I just want to see what the information comes back as. There's actually a council very close to us that has done this in a trust, the Manawatu District Council, and it has saved them millions, and they've provided more services. So, for their vulnerable community. So, communities. So I do think it's worth just having a look. Look, the dog one, let's just see what comes back. It may mean, I don't know if we've really gone to our councils around us properly and asked them what they're doing. So I'd like that to be done at a very high level, not an email, and just asking whether they'd be interested in a co-funded facility. So let's see where it all goes. It may end up straight back where we are, but at least we've got the information to look at. Okay, back to you, Councillor, for right of reply.
Thank you. Yeah, as the Mayor's pointed out, I think we make better decisions when we have got better information in front of us. And on both of these issues, I think having further information on what our options might look like would enable a better, more well-informed decision. And that's not preempting what that decision might be once we've got the information. On the points that Councillor Johnson raised about the previous report and the concerns about finding a housing provider and whether that's sustainable, you know, in that 7 years, we now have some really good examples in other places that we can look at. I had the opportunity over the summer to hear a little bit about the Christchurch Community Housing Trust, and they provide a financial dividend back to Christchurch Council. And they, in terms of a lease, it's a lease arrangement, and they provide more money back to the council, about 20 million over recent years, that Christchurch Council has been able to reinvest back into housing, so further social housing. So not only is it financially sustainable, it's financially beneficial. So I think it would be stupid of us to not look at this, and until such time, I mean, that's going to be looked at anyway. Supporting the recommendation today is indicating an intent of us wanting to be proactive about that. In terms of the people that might be upset, I'm actually really concerned about landowners who might feel that they are no longer able to be landowners with the rates increase that they will be facing in the coming years. And so I think we need to look at all of our community and the benefit of all of our community and all of the decisions that we make. I think I'll urge you to support these. This is asking for information so that we're better informed before we shift a policy setting.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Now we're going to take these separately, so we'll start with the topic around the amendment to social housing policy. And that is passed, 8 votes for and 6 against. Okay, and the second one is around the Animal Control Services Policy. We vote on that, please. And that again is passed, 8 votes for and 6 against. All right, councillors, we've entered your, excuse the pun, your lunchtime. So we will adjourn this meeting and over to my colleague, the Chair of Culture and Sport, which I think you will start at 1:15 on the dot, please. Thank you.